Alrighty, let's get underway. Thank you again for joining us. Welcome to the Eloqua user group for April. So this particular session is live and broadcast to our friends in the United States and across the Americas and into Europe. So thanks again for joining us. My name is Derek Bell. I'm the Director of Customer Success and Marketing at Marketing Cube, and Jason O'Donnell is also assisting us with Q&A today. So thank you very much. Just a little bit of housekeeping for you. We use Zoom to record and broadcast our sessions, and you'll have replays of the webinar available on our blog. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the session. We welcome those and would love you to participate. If you'd rather do or ask a question privately, you can use the chat function to do that as well. So the Q&A session is visible for everybody, so feel free to upvote any of the questions that people might submit. But let's have a look at the agenda. So we provide you with the opportunity to submit some questions when you register. At this stage, we didn't have any questions coming in from across the Americas or Europe this month, but we did have a couple from Australia and New Zealand. So we thought we'd share those with you as well. So you can have a look at some of the questions and get an idea of what people ask and what they inquire about. We'll then dive into the design editors and give you a quick overview of what they do, but we really want to focus this month on dynamic content and field merges to help you drive personalization within relevant campaigns. Then we'll have a look at a newsletter campaign that we've built here at Marketing Cube and show you some of the aspects of that process and how we do that, looking at segments, understanding the data. And if you joined us in February or March, we really focused on the data that matters and trying to figure out what that is and how important that is. And now what we want to do is look at that data and use it potentially to help us from a personalization point of view. We then also have a little bit of information from Oracle in relation to release 22B, which is due to hit us around May of this year. So let's jump in and have a look at some of those questions. So one of the questions that came in was from Sarah, a client in Sydney, Australia. And she asked the question, what's the solution to personalization when your CRM data is not that great? And look, I think that's a really valid question. And I'm sure Sarah's not the only person that probably could also ask that particular question. So what is the solution? So the solution essentially comes down to a degree of confidence. The greater your confidence in your own data, the better chance you have of actually being able to do something with that data and drive your personalization. But a big part of that process when it comes to really analyzing your data is to really carefully look at that data and look for opportunities to drive dynamic content. It's one thing to sit in a strategy meeting and get excited about, well, okay, this will be great. We want to provide some dynamic content and do this and that. But unless you have the underlying data to be able to do it, then the strategy really is of little use. So we need to understand our data, and that's where the carefully reviewing of that data really comes into it. Now, if there are gaps in your data, you can certainly create specific field merges for campaigns and sort of tailor those field merges in a very specific way for relevant campaigns. So we'll have a little look at that as well for you today. So one of the things to always keep in mind, of course, is that Eloqua requires you to have a default in case the data value is not available. So, for example, you might want to present some images to people and maybe use the country as the value. And I'll show you an example of that shortly. But if the country is missing, there's no value listed in the country field, then we need to present a default image of some particular point. And so the image that you provide obviously just needs to make sense to people, but is not specifically, in that example, it's not geographically specific. Now, a default can also be blank. Okay, so don't forget that. And I'll show you an example of where we did that in one of our newsletters, so you can see how that works. Another question, this one came from Charlie in Auckland, New Zealand. So Charlie manages a global team from New Zealand for her organization, largely across, I think, Chicago for the US, and through London and Hamburg in Germany. So with that global group using Eloqua, there's all sorts of challenges that come about from a personalization point of view, and there's lots of different data and different levels of quality of data. So the response for Charlie is probably not too dissimilar than it was for Sarah, but here Charlie's asking about the notion of kind of making her emails pop. And so the first point I would say to you is it's great that you've got this technology available as Eloqua customers, but I'm the last person in the world to say to you, look, you should just be doing dynamic content because it's available. No, I'm never going to suggest that. What I will suggest, though, is always certainly look for opportunities to personalize your communications better. And the best way you can do that is by understanding your data. And then you really just need to do some testing. And so I kind of identified there maybe a 3-step process. So first one is you really need to know your audience. So not just the data, but potentially also have some insight into the humans that you're actually communicating with. Second step is to review the segment and look for opportunities to personalize. So let's say, for example, we take that example of country. If I look at my data and I've got maybe 6,000 people in my segment, when I look at the country field right across the 6,000 people, do I have a value for maybe 5,000 or slightly over 5,000? If I do, then, well, I think that's probably a really good opportunity. We can work with the default to deliver a generic image or generic type of message where country is missing. But we've certainly got lots of value there, I think, to be able to play with that information and provide some visual personalization, and then also maybe in our copy, some personalization that relates more specifically to that particular geography or country. And then the third step I would suggest to you is really about testing, improving, and measuring. So testing the process, you've just got to test it. You can't just sit there and think, well, maybe should we, shouldn't we? Just go for it. Look for those opportunities, look for opportunities to play with dynamic content and see how that works, improve as you go and constantly measure that process as you run through. So that would be my suggestion to Charlie for her question. So I just wanted to show you this example. This is actually a communication we run with Oracle. So as you would imagine, as an Oracle partner, we spend a lot of time talking to the Oracle account directors and sales representatives around the world, and a number of them will just stumble across us. So we found over time that we started to get Oracle people into our database from France and from the US and Canada and from South America, etc. And then we decided, well, it's actually getting really difficult for us to communicate with these guys in a really relevant way. So we decided it was probably would have been 6 or 7 years ago now, we decided that we need to make country one of the critical questions that we ask on all of our forms. And so here we are 6 or 7 years later, and it's been an ongoing process. And I would say to you that in our database, which is not that huge, we have about 10,000 contacts in our database, and there's probably as little as 100 or 200 of those contacts that do not have a country value assigned. So that's been hard work, and it's taken a lot of time for us to get to that point. But the thing is, you have to start somewhere. Now, because we've got that, it makes a lot of other things really easy and possible for us to do. And so this particular email is, in fact, one email, but using dynamic content in the email or the hero image that you can see there. And so if your geography is pretty good, you can probably pick out the top left-hand corner is that San Francisco. So anybody from Oracle in the US that fills in a form and tells us a little bit about them, they'll get that message. And so the message is the same, but the banner will change a little just to provide some degree of personalization. You'll also notice that we personalize with their name as well. So we put in Ren and chap here from Singapore. And that last one you may or may not recognize, that's actually Brisbane in Queensland, Australia. So we have obviously based here in Sydney, Australia. So we have a little bit more granularity here in relation to states. So we have Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane. And again, just some images to support that. So that's just a really simple example of how you can use some dynamic content just to lift an email or make it pop, potentially, as Charlie was suggesting, along with that personalization. So point to be made there is you can, of course, have field mergers inside your dynamic content as well. So maybe we call that hyper-personalization. Okay, the other thing that we like to share with you each month is a little bit of attribution, largely because we just want to show you how easy it is and the power of forms and what can be done. And it seems to make sense that if we share with you what's happening with the user group, that just kind of works. If you do have your smartphone handy, we've been asking over the last 12 months where we should be communicating from a social media point of view with you as customers and those who are friends of Marketing Cube, and LinkedIn certainly seem to win hands down. So if you've got your smartphone handy, feel free to scan that QR code and you can come and follow us on LinkedIn. This month was actually really interesting. So this is the first time this has actually happened. And our registrations for this month have been no different. They're kind of on average as they've been for the last sort of 12 plus months or so. We've been doing the user group for nearly 7 years. But this month, it was only email. So we have a link on our website to register for the user group. We also have it in our blog from last month. And we also do a post on LinkedIn as well. But email won this month. Literally 100% of people that registered this month did so as a result of receiving email communications from us, inviting them. So the user group is a membership-based organization, so subscription. And that's it. That's the first time that's ever happened. So it was quite interesting. But what is a little bit interesting, if you break that information down, where did the most conversions come from? So each month what we do, as you're probably aware, you receive these communications. For those who attended last month, they get an email that says, thank you very much for attending. For those who registered but didn't attend, plus the other members who didn't register at all for that particular session last month, they receive an email saying, sorry, we missed you. And what's interesting here is, last month, the post-event campaigns from last month delivered 46% of the registrants for this month. That's actually been the highest, I think, that we've had in that case. I probably need to go back and do more analysis of older campaigns, but that was quite telling. That was quite interesting. So essentially, 46% of people had registered for this month before the invitations, the official invitations, even went out. All that happened was that they received the comms from last month with a link to register. So maybe there's a lesson there. There's some insight there. If you've got regular types of webinars, there's certainly benefit in advertising the next webinar in your post-event communications that you send out to people. So I'd encourage you to have a think about that, depending on the volume of webinars that you're doing, of course. Now, another question we ask, it relates to country, as we talked about here just a few moments ago. And what we do is we use a program within Eloqua to take country and then from country automatically populate a field in Eloqua called region. So what we've done is we've given to Eloqua a table that has every single country on the planet in column A. And then in column B, we've assigned a region to that particular country. It's kind of the world according to Marketing Cube from that point of view, but that makes it a lot easier. So for instance, when I'm cutting out a campaign, say for Europe, what I don't need to do is say, anyone in France, anyone in Germany, anyone in the Netherlands, anyone in Norway, anyone in Sweden. I mean, it's too much, right? So what I've done is created 2 regions. We have the EU and Europe. And if you're a bit of a geography nut, you'll know exactly who falls into which within that category, but it makes my filtering so much easier. And that all happens automatically. So I never ask somebody what their region is because, it's, as I said, it's kind of the world according to Marketing Cube as to which country falls into which region. So we just let Eloqua do the heavy lifting for us. And so literally, as a brand new contact comes in, I think it's within about half an hour, as long as country has been disclosed on a form, then Eloqua will pick that up automatically and will populate the region field for me. So that makes my life a lot easier as a marketer with my segmentation. So that's just one example. As long as you have data where A equals B, then you can let Eloqua do the heavy lifting for you and just automatically run some programs to do that data cleansing and updating different fields. All right, let's jump in now and have a look at the design editors. As you know, if you're new to Eloqua, you'll have probably discovered already details in relation to the So in relation to the email editor and its responsiveness, so it certainly is very simple to use. It's a drag and drop style of function. It enables you to, the end result being a fully responsive asset, whether it's a landing page or an email. And the key thing that we wanted to focus on this month was the addition of the dynamic content and field merges. So they're really the two key functions within Eloqua that help you personalize. So if you're sitting in strategy meetings and you're looking at planning and you're talking in relation to what the next campaign is going to look like, and people start to say, well, how are we going to personalize it? What are we going to do, etc.? The functions within Eloqua that will deliver that for you are largely dynamic content and field merges to drive that process for you. There are other aspects that you can obviously use, like shared content and content blocks. However, those two pieces don't specifically alter or change based on the information that you know about a particular individual. So there's a question here. Let's have a look. It says, a lot of contacts are getting stuck in Salesforce.com association step in the campaign canvas. The error is saying cannot update duplicate lead ID. Any insights? Okay, so this can be overcome. I know it can be overcome. It is a little bit above my pay grade to provide you with a specific workaround, but we, as you know, the session is recorded and we capture all of these questions. I'd be more than happy to reach out to you tomorrow or probably have a chat with our tech team, and then I can maybe send you a little bit of information on that one. But as you know, Salesforce has no problem with duplicates. So you can have the same person in Salesforce as two separate leads with the same email address, but obviously having two different lead IDs from Salesforce. Now, in the Eloqua world, an email can't appear twice. So there could be something in relation to the way the integration has been set up, for example, where typically what is done here is we wanted Eloqua to update the last modified information. The integration can be directed to do all sorts of different things, but certainly the last modified would be the right one. And that's the information that should be sitting in Eloqua, as in the lead ID that's sitting within Eloqua. So for instance, you've got two leads sitting in Salesforce, same name, two different lead IDs, same email address. If somebody modifies one at 9 o'clock in the morning, during the next sync, that's what we'll update into Eloqua. However, if somebody goes to the other one in Salesforce at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, same email address, and then make some updates during the next integration, which should happen every sort of 5 or 10 minutes with Eloqua, Eloqua would in fact be updated. The same email address remains the same. However, the lead ID probably should also be updated along with whatever the information is that you brought through. So the secret there, there's typically when we configure integration between Eloqua and Salesforce, we configure it so that we go first of all to the contacts within Salesforce and see if we can locate a contact with that email address. If we can't, we then move on to the lead object within Salesforce. Again, looking to match the email address with a lead in Salesforce. If it finds one, it can update it. However, if it doesn't find one, it can then create the new lead. So what we end up there is no duplicates. Okay, we avoid that notion of duplicates being created by Eloqua within Salesforce. So that's probably about as much information I can give you that's of any value. So hopefully that assists. Okay, so what I wanted to do here was take a look at some emails for you and just give you a little bit of an example of what the email editor can do and some of the little tricks along the way that might make it a little bit easier for you to build things. And of course, with a focus on dynamic content and field merges. All right, so if I jump into the email area, I'll zoom in just a little bit there for you. So this is the email. I showed you a little bit of a screenshot there a moment ago of the geographical hero image, okay, and had the different images, the different cities from around the world. And so this is the whole email here. So in here, we just provide the Oracle team with a few other links to see things, but this is the dynamic content that you can see here. So as I scroll through, these are different cities. This is Melbourne in Australia. That was the Brisbane one I showed you. There's Toronto, the US, etc. Actually, sorry, that's Toronto. The other one was New Zealand. I apologize. Similar towers that you can see there. Now, the editing capability, I can edit that directly from here. But what we want to do here is just focus a little bit on some of the key areas of the platform. So let's jump in and have a look. And what I want to show you here, this is actually one of the subscriptions that we offer. You'll find links on our website, and we'll share these with you occasionally from time to time and invite you. So this is our feedback and updates in relation to the first release for 2022. And so what we do is we walk through the process of building these out, and you can see there's different sections. So some of the key things to think about when you're building out newsletters, for example, is making sure that these different areas that you focus on from a content point of view are all contained within a single layout. So you'll notice when I hover closer in here of the copy, I see the content with this sort of bluish purple outline. If I move slightly out though, that changes to the layout, which is that orange highlight that you can see. Now, what we want to try and do is keep everything contained within single layouts, because it just makes it easier for us to move things around should we want to, and just to control various aspects of it. The other thing that's really nice, especially in the context of a newsletter, is if you've been clever with the way that you've designed it, if you decide that you now need another section, you've got to add another article, what you can do is, instead of coming over here and potentially grabbing something like this and dropping it in and then grabbing a text box and so on and so forth, the challenge with all of this now, of course, is I have to highlight, I have to format it, add my padding, get the right font size and so on and so forth. So I'm just going to delete that. The easier way to do it is to actually duplicate. So you'll see here, when you look at the layout side, you've got the block menu. This is duplicate, and then this is trash. So if I click on duplicate, now immediately I've duplicated that. And so now I can work on way and start working on this next piece of content, and I can edit that at will. Now, this particular example I've chosen is actually dynamic content. So it was just slightly different. So I can delete that again. This is actually active, so I won't save anything. Now, this one was quite interesting because there's dynamic content here at the bottom. So for those of you that are on the call that are using Zoom, Zoom is, there's an app, as you probably know, that connects between Zoom and Eloqua, and everybody's been waiting for an update. So what I wanted to do here was certainly make sure I got that information to any of our subscribers. But I also know that there are people who they've told us they're using Zoom. So I figured there wasn't any point in me adding that particular piece to every single email that went out. So all I did was make sure the rules for this particular piece of dynamic content was only visible to those people who have actually told us they're using Zoom. Okay, so you've got great control over that. But you'll notice that when I look at it in the edit area, the default is actually completely blank. So all I wanted to do was populate that section of the newsletter for people who have told us that they use Zoom. And so I've got here webinar platform, either on the account or contact field area, and so on and so forth. But for anyone who doesn't use Zoom, they just see nothing. I hadn't thought about this, but I was literally talking to a client today about this, and she said, so what happens for the people that don't see that? Will they just see a big white space? Absolutely not. They won't see a big white space. Now, you can always validate that by going to your actions menu and a preview. Now, this is a little bit easier for me because I have a very specific view in here called technology profile. Well, this one right here, technology. And webinar platform is one of the pieces there. So if I just type in anybody, yeah, okay. So if I take this one, notice there's no webinar platform that has been designated or we have a response for. So when I preview the email in the context of that person, you'll see when I get to the bottom of the email that that Zoom article won't be visible. it's just hidden, and there's not a huge white space where the article should be. It just simply is completely blank. So if I scroll down to the bottom of the email, here we go. So that's where, so the last article for them is around SMS, and you can see here, there's no massive gap or space. It's just simply not there. However, if I look at that preview in the context of somebody using Zoom, that will be me. So preview. And again, as we scroll down to the bottom of the page, this time, now we see the Zoom information. So that whole process is driven essentially by dynamic content. Now, a couple of other things to look at when we're playing with emails. Sometimes the layout for different people can be a little bit of a challenge. So there's just a couple of little tips I'll give you. And we always start life at Marketing Cube, pretty much regardless of what we're doing. We would start life from a template. So let's take, if I go to all files, and let's play with the Eloqua user group. That's probably the best example. And I'll take the confirmation email. And so some of the things that could really save some time is understanding that whole concept again, just to reiterate the layout area, etc. Okay, so another question here. I want to delete hundreds of opted out contacts from Eloqua. Will that affect anything, or should I go for it? It's a great question. And look, essentially, yes, you should go for it from the point of view that they've opted out. So clearly, they're really just taking up space in Eloqua. The only thing you're going to have to consider, though, is what happens if your instance of Eloqua is integrated with a CRM platform. Now, if any of those contacts that have opted out are also sitting in the CRM, you can certainly go to town and delete them from Eloqua. But the next time the integration kicks in, all of those people are just simply going to flow back into Eloqua, because the CRM really is the source of truth at that particular point. So there are ways that you can use programs and certainly make some updates to your integration to control that process. Again, happy to talk with you a little bit further about that one and provide some solutions. There are a number of different ways to go about doing that. All right, so what I want to show you here, so this is a template that we use for confirmation email, and you can see it's largely placeholders for pretty much everything. And then the way we've designed them is we've kind of built it out here to have 3 different articles, but we also use blocks from time to time to add information in. And one of the things that we have is obviously a fairly big library of replays for the user group. And so I can, in fact, bring some of these in which case I can delete these and use some of our blocks to drive that process. So that, and these are all ready to go. I don't have to do anything. The block has been completely configured to be ready to go. I can make edits if I want to, perhaps in the context of a particular campaign, or in the context of a particular communication. Maybe I want to change the language here slightly, but these are all ready to go. These already have hyperlinks sitting behind them going directly to landing pages, and so on and so forth. And so that's just one really great example of personalizing using blocks. But remember, this is not dynamic content. We're not changing what is being presented here. This is really just basic functionality of the Eloqua platform from an email builder point of view. And so I can play around with things, adjust things. One thing that came up today, actually, was it today or yesterday? It may have been yesterday, was just understanding these text defaults here. I was working with a client, and they had built out a range of templates where they had stuck with the Eloqua default of all copy being black, so 0000000, but they wanted everything to be a grey. And so the problem they had with that was then they're constantly choosing different greys. The different members of the team weren't quite clear on which grey they should be choosing. So there was inconsistency throughout. So I sat down and I said to them, hang on a minute, let's go back into your template masters and let's readjust them so that the template color default is the right color gray that you've got going across it. And that way people don't have to keep playing and guessing and, oh, is it that gray or is it that gray, for example. So when you build out your templates, make sure you lock these things in. That's also the color. You can change the blue for highlighting URLs, etc., and those sorts of things. So pay attention to that. It certainly makes things easier for the people building the emails, and it also ensures a degree of consistency as well, which is super important. Okay, so driving enhanced personalization is our next step. So here we want to focus very specifically on dynamic content and field merges and how they work together. But probably the first thing to understand is, what's the difference? So there is an important difference. So dynamic content and field merges both obviously use the Oracle Eloqua data to determine the output of content. It could be hello first name. So first name would be Derek for me, for example. However, the delivery of dynamic content is a little bit different. So a field merge takes information from the Eloqua contact or a custom object or other parts of Eloqua and displays it directly. So by that, I mean on my contact in the first name field, it has the value of Derek. That's my name. So that's how a field merge works. It takes that exact value as it appears on the contact and then drops that into a particular email or displays it on a landing page or even in a form. All field merges being used there. Whereas dynamic content will use that data to determine which version of the content to display. And so going back to the example I had of those hero images with the city skyline type of images for the different countries, that's the example that we're talking about there. So we take the value of USA to present the terrace homes in San Francisco, or the Sydney Opera House in Australia and Sydney, or Elizabeth Tower in London, etc. So it's taking the value of country very specifically to control which version of the content we're displaying. So a little bit different. And as I showed you there earlier, it's also important to, or worth noting, is probably a better term, that field merges can obviously also be included in your dynamic content. So they become hyper-personalized at that point. So again, just to reiterate, as a visual, you can see here that email that we were looking at just a few moments ago. And we're saying that the dynamic content uses the data to determine which version. So if you're in Sydney, Australia, you'll see that particular image. But if we look at the field merge will display the first name of the contact directly into your asset, whether it's the email that you see in front of you or whether it's a landing page. So either of those two. So dynamic content is rules-based. And if you've spent some time playing in the segmentation area of Eloqua, then you'll be very familiar with what can be done within dynamic content. So let's jump in and have a closer look. So setting up different types of rules is quite easy within the dynamic content area. So we go to our asset menu to components, and from components, we go to dynamic content. So dynamic content forms part of the component library. So you can see here we are in the component library with dynamic content. Then what we want to do is locate some dynamic content that helps us look at those rules. So here's one I prepared earlier. We'll keep focusing on that example, if you like, of the hero images for the Oracle team. And here it is. So when you first arrive in the dynamic content, it's basically blank. It just has default rule. You can see here there are no rules that you set for the default. The default is only ever presented should there not be any data to deliver a result for any of the rules that you create. But we still want to have a value in there. So we were like, okay, so which city skyline should we use? We said, well, Sydney, Australia is head office. Let's have the Sydney Opera House. It's a lovely photo. It looks nice. So that works. But then as we start to drill in, what we do is we click on the plus icon, and the plus icon will deliver a new rule for you. By default, it names it the next number. It's 1, 2, 3. But I find you really want to go through the process and actually give that a name. So where haven't I done do South Australia. So I do Australia, South Australia being the state. Then I need to create the rules. So I click on the plus, click on compare contacts. So my logic here will first of all be to identify the country as Australia. So find my value, there it is. Then click on the plus icon again, another contact field. In this case, I want to narrow it down to a state or province. And in this case, it's exactly SA, which is the abbreviation that we use for South Australia. And so there we go. So now I've created the rule. Then what I need to do is pop in my image. Now, a little bit of a cheat sheet for you in relation to this process. The editor, which you may have already noticed, the editor that you can see here within dynamic content is in fact the old editor. And if you've been using Eloqua for at least 5 or more years, this is the editor that you'd be quite familiar with in your building of emails, etc., where we double click and drop images in, for instance, etc. But the challenge with this particular editor is that it didn't really deliver a responsive email. And so that's why obviously the new design editors were created. Okay, so how do we overcome that? This is a little bit of a cheat or a hack, you might say. So what we do is we use the email editor simply to create some content for us. We don't want to use it like this is clearly never going to be an email. All I'm doing is using the email editor to actually create some content for me. So here's one I prepared earlier. That one's Auckland, by the way. So you just go ahead and build it. What you want to, there are no headers, there are no footers, because it's actually never going to be an email. As I said, we're just using it to build some content. But everything you do today in building out an email is going to be exactly the same. Once you're happy with that and you've got everything in place, what you can do is come here to the Actions menu and choose Export HTML. From there, you can copy that to your clipboard. That's all you need to do. Cancel out of that. Come back to your dynamic content and click on source. So let me just come into that again. So here we are. We've created the rules. We need to click on the content full button. So we come to the full editing window. And then we change it to the source area, which is HTML. So the HTML is sitting in my clipboard on my Mac. All I have to do is click on paste. If I then click on the word rich, I come back, I can see it there. You'll notice that the image isn't there. It is actually there. You just need to save the dynamic content and come back into it. So I'm just going to save that. And you'll notice when that's done. And if anyone's a bit geographically savvy, you will realize that I'm sending this from Australia or South Australia, but that's actually Auckland. So that's fine. I'll delete that here in a moment so I don't send out a wrong hero image. And I'll need to add that later on. But that's a really easy way to kind of cheat a little bit. The folks at Oracle have made it really clear, though, that this editor is being rebuilt. And in the next edition of Eloqua, I probably should have a safe harbor statement and all that sort of fun stuff. If you've been around Oracle long enough, you know about safe harbor statements. But yes, we understand that this editor is, excuse me, going to be modified, enabling you to build content exactly like you can today within the actual email design editor as well, and have a sort of an HTML-free experience, which will be nice. But that's how you at least build your dynamic content and play around. Now, we've only focused here in this example using the Eloqua contact. You can also use the custom objects as well. You can use account fields and the custom objects as well. So again, if you've been working with custom objects from a segmentation point of view, you'll kind of know how that one works. So you select your custom object, identify the particular field in place, and then depending on what you're doing there, you can choose a relevant image or, sorry, rule to then drive the images below. Now, I want to get rid of that, so I can just right-click and say delete. And so that one will go. And we're back to the default. And hit save, and I'm done. So that's how you can go through the process of actually building out some dynamic content. The one question a lot of people seem to ask when it comes to things like dynamic content is, can I do dynamic content based on what people look at on the website? The answer is yes, you can, but it's not as simple as we've just gone through. So the process, if I just go back in there again, you'll see the ability to create the rules are driven by data that you can see on the contact, or that you have stored from an account level point of view, or you have sitting on a custom object. There is also those people who may be using the event module in other editions of Eloqua, so you can also access information from there as well. But the vast majority of people will be using probably the contact, maybe the account, and certainly custom objects to deliver dynamic content. So can you create dynamic content based on activity on the website? Well, yes, you can actually, but it requires a little bit of heavy lifting and work to do that, probably in combination with the program Canvas to be listening and to be able to modify certain things, and then probably using a custom object to hold that information so that the dynamic content can actually reference it and play with it. Let's have a quick look at field merges as well, because that's obviously another important part of the exercise. So one of the examples I like to show people that we do here, because everyone can kind of get this one, is in relation to company. So the company name. So you can see here there's only one field in Eloqua called company, and it's going to have your company name in there. However, the way I engage with that particular field is going to differ extensively. So, for instance, you'll see here I've got company, your organization, PC. What does that mean? Well, that means proper case, which I'm sure you understand what that is, versus lowercase. So lowercase, proper case, etc. And so what I wanted to be able to do here was, in the absence of having a company name, I wanted to be able to have the words either your organization or your business. Now, the reason for the difference is we spend a lot of our time with different customers, and we have a large cohort of organizations within the university sector around the world. And then we have a large cohort of clients in very much the traditional B2B business space as well. And so depending on who I'm talking to, I wanted to make sure that things were a little bit softer. You know, most universities don't like being referred to as a business. Arguably, maybe they are. I've had that conversation quite a few times with them. But organization is a little bit better. And certainly if we're talking to those within the not-for-profit sector, again, if I don't know their company name, I just want to be a little bit softer in the language. And so that's where I've got the ability to control that. So let's have a look at this one. So whenever I name a field merge, what I tend to try and do is, in the name of the field merge, actually have whatever my default value is, exactly as it appears. I just find that makes it a lot easier when I'm actually in an email or a landing page or a form. I can see kind of right in front of me what the default is going to be without having to come back into the component library and have a look at that information in more detail. So where am I merging from? I'm merging from a contact field. You'll see that you do have a range of different ways that you can merge or where that data is coming from. And specifically, the field on the contact that I'm merging from is the field called company. And if it's blank in this example, so if I'm trying to send out an email and if it is blank, then the default value would simply be your business. And that's why I put the LC at the end, so it's in lowercase, so I know what the different ones are. So if I'm putting a field merge in the middle of a sentence, then I would have lowercase. If I'm putting the field merge at the beginning of a sentence, I would have proper case. So I've got a capital Y instead of a lowercase y. So a few little things like that. So that's what I mean by looking at your data, understanding what your data looks like, and then figuring out which sort of field merge is going to make the most sense. And it's reasonably common to have multiple field merges for a single field. A single field merge doesn't always cut it. Okay, so the next key question that most people want to know is, how do I determine if I'm going to personalize? And I think that's a really good question. So there are a whole range of ways we can do it, but I find the easiest way to do it is to actually look at the data. And when I say look at the data, what I mean is let's actually have a look at the segment. So I'm going to go into segments from the contact menu, and from within segments, we'll dig in a little bit deeper. And it is, okay, so this one, so this is 149 individuals. You can see we're not dealing in the thousands. Okay, now it's 136. But by coming to view contacts, here I can actually dive in and have a closer look. So there are a whole range of views that I've got, but I've actually got a specific view called subscribers. And the reason I have this particular view is because what I want to be able to do is look at the common fields that we would use to do some dynamic content. And we're going to base that probably largely on region, on industry, on job category, and potentially who the salesperson is, depending on what we want to do there. So what I'm able to do here is I can have a quick look and I can see through this particular group. Okay, so I have a decent chunk of people in financial services, information and media and technology, sort of similar. Not-for-profit, there's only two particular folks from that space. Professional services is a bit more. And so what I can do here now is have a closer look and realize, well, okay, if I want to create some dynamic content, there's certainly worthwhile looking at some industry-specific imagery or looking at developing my copy that is a little bit, well, the copy is written in such a way as to kind of acknowledge these types of industries. At a really basic level, it's, you know, for instance, if I notice I've got a lot of people who are from the educational sector, well, I'm going to talk about students and prospective students and that type of language. However, if I've got a lot of people in the financial services sector, then I probably want to talk about clients. If I have a lot in the retail trade, I may use the more generic term of customers, for example, right? So it's just having that ability to change language ever so slightly, because at the end of the day, we want the information that we're getting across to people to resonate. And so if there are some key words that will help them engage a little bit better with the content that you're sharing, certainly using dynamic content to do it works really, really well. And one of the best examples I find for dynamic content, or one of the really good use cases, certainly in a B2B setting, relates to events. So if I'm running an event, obviously, it's just one event. We're not doing multiple events. It's just one event. But if I've got people from financial services, people from higher or from the university sector, and then even within those two sectors or organizations, I might have different seniority. So from a job category point of view, I may have C-level executives along with your vice presidents and those sorts of people coming right through to, you know, managers, individual contributors, etc. And so quite often what I'll do is whether it's the subject line, I'd use that to be dynamic content, and then my introduction paragraph. So that very first paragraph that people read can be very tailored. And if I can tailor it, the way that I would incentivize a C-level executive to come along versus an individual contributor, it's going to be quite different. You could also use personas, obviously, to help in that process as well. But that opening paragraph is a great use case example for dynamic content. So I'd encourage you to have a little think about that one. The rest of the information, the agenda is the same, the venue is the same, all the other information remains the same. However, just that little bit of dynamic content can really help to make the message resonate with the people that you're talking to. Okay, so personalization of newsletters, I've kind of shown you most of what I wanted to do there. I was just a little bit sensitive to time because we're running out. So the key thing I wanted to show you there was what I showed earlier was that Zoom article that was in the newsletter for some and not for others. And so that same principle could be applied if you've got a newsletter that maybe goes out with 10 or 15 articles, which is a lot of information. Some of those articles might be best presented only to specific individuals from within certain industries, for example, or certain geographies, for example. So think about using some dynamic content in your newsletters, which can help you consolidate to having a single newsletter, but actually having a fairly hyper-personalized newsletter experience based on the information that you know about people. Okay, so as we come up towards the end of our session today, I just wanted to quickly present to you some of the early information that we have in relation to the next release of Eloqua, which is 22B. So for most clients within the Americas and certainly some in Europe, you'll be on pod 1, maybe pod 2. And so for you, that's happening at Friday, the 27th of May, 10 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, US East Coast. Most of the pod 7 folks are really based here in Asia Pac, so that probably won't impact most people on the call today. But if you're on any of these other pods, all this information is available on Topliners. There were some changes, just so you're aware. Some of these dates have slipped and changed and moved. So these are the latest dates that I was able to source earlier this week from Topliners. So just something for you to be aware of. What's coming though is the audience split decision step that you saw last release for the campaign canvas is now also available on the program canvas. And so we're kind of working to figure out best case or use cases for that. And we'll come up with some of those as we talk with clients and others that are playing with them. A new metric is auto clicks, which I'm still wanting more information on. We have auto opens. We know that's available within Insight today. That was as a part of the release in February, so 22A, but auto clicks. So I need some more information. It's kind of these scanning and privacy tools that seem to be the main problem that potentially do auto clicks. So being able to separate those out is quite helpful. Engage send limits. So if you do have sales team members, excuse me, using the Eloqua Engage product, you can now limit the number of sends that people can, or those users can do, which is good. The last thing you probably want is a salesperson becoming a marketing team of one using Eloqua Engage and sending out their own massive campaigns. If you're using any of the Oracle Commerce products, this particular Oracle Commerce product does integrate with Eloqua. That integration is now available, so that helps. And if you're using the new Eloqua SMS app functionality, then there's also been enhancements there. What those enhancements are, I don't have just yet, just simply that there's more coming, which is good news. And then if you've got some time next month, we'd love to see you. We're going to continue with this conversation around personalization, but next month we'll be focusing on those products that the salesperson uses, largely that Engage product, a little bit about Profiler, but also how you as a marketing team can help personalize the communications that you send out so that they look like they're coming from the sales team or from others within the organization and not just simply coming from the brand, so to speak. So hopefully you can join us next month. We look forward to seeing you. We'll get some information out to you. Happy to stay on the line here. We've got a couple of minutes. If you do have any further questions, but if you do, I'm happy to stay on the line. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you spending some time with us, and you'll hear from us in the next week or so. And then we look forward to seeing you next month. Thanks again, everybody. Have a wonderful day. Cheers. Bye-bye.